Kayaking or stand-up paddleboarding in winter or during the cold season can be a fantastic experience, but it also requires more preparation and particular clothing and gear to stay comfortable and safe on the water and when back on land. My name is Patrik Vuorio, and I have become very fond of paddling as a sport, and I'm happy to be able to safely enjoy it in winter and the cold season. Among other things, I've been a professional, volunteer and instructor in safety, emergency preparedness and response for many years, so for me, safety has a very natural connection with paddling. It's all about the right mindset and preparations, and on this topic, I've received quite a few requests to create a video about what clothing I use in winter or the cold season, so in this video I'll show that. Solutions for a safe and comfortable experience, and also discuss cold season clothing and safety in general. This overview video has chapters for easy reference, if there's one or more particular topics that you're interested in. This way, if you like, you can also watch the video bit by bit and come back to the next chapter later on. Paddling in winter can be amazing. Snow and ice create beautiful landscapes, and in the cold season in general, small boats and watercraft often don't go out on the water. So you might have peaceful landscapes to yourselves while paddling with an amazing ambience. And for the more adventurous paddler, it might be fun and a special challenge to paddle in falling snow and cold wind. But overall, for a paddler, staying warm and comfortable is nice during the trip, and frankly, a matter of safety. Cold water, ice or cold air temperatures are dangerous to take seriously. And as a paddler in cold water, you always need to be prepared for a scenario when you might unintentionally end up in the water, capsizing with your kayak or falling off your stand-up paddleboard. You'll be much more vulnerable unless you have proper clothing and gear, and in really cold water, you could immediately be affected by cold shock, unintentionally breathe in water, or find your ability to move quickly decrease as your muscles get affected by the cold of the water. This is no joke. Experienced paddlers are usually well aware of this, but many beginning paddlers aren't necessarily aware of how serious things can get quickly. So make sure that you're well protected, prepared, and make your safety assessments when you're out in the cold season. You need to be dressed so that you can withstand not only the immediate impact of falling into cold water, but unless you're always paddling immediately by land, you also need to prepare for being in the water for a longer amount of time. And without proper protection, we're talking about a Drysuit or at least a thick wetsuit here, a long time is everything beyond a couple of minutes, or even less than that. You also need to be prepared to help your fellow paddler or paddlers in case they end up in the water. Never go out without wearing your PFD. In the cold season, this would mean a life vest or a life jacket. The flotation it provides is critical in cold water. In addition, it actually provides a bit of extra isolation that you should also take into account when planning your clothing. Depending on where you paddle, you might also end up unintentionally stranded on land if the wind or weather suddenly gets worse, or if there's damage to your kayak or SUP on an everyday basis, even if nothing goes wrong, as hopefully it doesn't, if you're prepared and plan well. Paddling in the cold season can be just that, cold. And it's no fun being miserable out on the water because you're underdressed, or freezing when you get up on land when you're no longer moving and you find you don't have enough clothing, but still need to pack up and sort out your gear before heading home. Much better to have extra clothing to reinforce, so you're comfortable throughout. The points on the body where a person loses the most heat are their head and extremities, so naturally, that's where paddlers also suffer the most in really cold conditions. And most paddlers who paddle in the cold season have experienced how rough this can be at some point. Cold feet, hands can get not just uncomfortable but painful with freezing toes and fingers, and cold wind blowing against your unprotected face can be less than fun as well. Other than that, we obviously want the whole body to be protected, both in case of ending up in the water and if you suddenly find yourself in heavy rain, of course. So whatever solution for paddling in the cold season you're using, make sure that things are fully waterproof and adequate for the temperature. In this video, I'll be talking about conditions with cold water, let's say water temperatures under 15 degrees Celsius, and in those conditions, a dry suit, or at least a wetsuit of proper thickness, is indicated for being safe in the water. At a later point, I'll create more videos about warmer conditions where other types of clothing might be relevant. Obviously, the colder the water, the more protected you want to be. And before you go out on any paddling trip, you should always check forecasts for weather, air temperatures, wind, any changes expected during your paddle, and be aware of current water temperature and adjust your clothing accordingly. Before we go into clothing for different parts of your body, dry suit or wetsuit, reinforcement clothes and spare clothes, it's always a good thing to reiterate the basic principle. Dress for immersion. That means that in cold water, even if it's a sunny day and you're almost too warm while paddling, if you end up in the water, you'll be in a very dangerous situation quickly if you're not properly protected. The air temperature is what you experienced most during your paddle, but your clothing needs to be sufficient to protect you if you end up in the water. Thus, dress for the water temperature, not the air temperature. This is actually something that can be one of the more difficult things for paddlers to balance, and actually is easier to handle in winter, in my opinion. When it's really cold in the air and also in the water, you simply dress warm and you're able to paddle comfortably without getting too warm. But as winter changes into spring, the water will still likely be dangerously cold, while air temperatures start getting much higher. And with the heat you generate while paddling, this is when it can really get tricky, as it may be warm in the air on a sunny day, but if you were to end up in the water, it might still not be many degrees above the freezing point. So the principle still remains: safety first and dress for immersion. Always bring a spare set of clothes in dry bags when paddling in cold water. When paddling in cold water, the danger of ending up in the water means we have to protect ourselves. Investing in a dry suit or wetsuit offers a lot of opportunities. It extends the paddle season for you, since you can now paddle comfortably and safely during a lot more of the year, depending on water temperatures where you live. The difference between these two is that a dry suit will essentially keep you fully dry if you end up in the water, while a wetsuit is designed to slowly let in a bit of water through the suit, which then ends up as an extra layer between your body and the suit, and as the water gets warmed up by your body heat, it provides you extra protection against the cold water outside the wetsuit. Using a wetsuit has a bit of a complexity to it though, as it needs to fit you well to be effective, and for colder water, you'll need a thicker wetsuit graded for that kind of water. I've used a wetsuit mainly for stand-up paddleboarding in the fall, but as we head into winter temperature and really cold water, a dry suit is really what provides full safety, as it keeps out the water entirely. And as I now kayak during the winter season, I never go out without my dry suit on. The dry suit can be expensive, but if you kayak a lot, it can be a really worthwhile investment, as it allows you to paddle all year round. And there are dry suit options that aren't quite as expensive as the more advanced models. Since I purchased my dry suit, I use it all the time, so the clothing I'll show going forward is based on what I wear beneath my dry suit as a kayaker. For a stand-up paddleboarder, or if you're paddling in warmer waters where it's okay to wear a paddle jacket and waterproof pants or dry pants, a lot of these examples of clothing are still relevant, and obviously the kind of gloves, footwear, and clothing underneath, etc. is always going to vary a bit depending on the conditions you're going out in. If you're investing in a dry suit, the point is that it keeps you entirely dry and waterproof during your paddle. This isn't necessarily entirely true, however, as the dry suit neck gasket varies. Most are made with a latex neck, which presses against your neck and is really tight, which means no water gets in whatsoever, essentially. But some dry suits have neoprene neck gaskets, for example the one I have. It's a trade-off because it means a great amount of comfort, and my particular kind of dry suit is like an overall that I just close with a zipper on top of the rest of my clothes, meaning it's really easy and comfortable to use. But if I'm fully immersed in the water, there can be a little bit of water ingress from the front around the neck. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough that I'd probably want to change my upper body wear when I get up on land after a capsize. Then again, as long as I'm floating above the surface in the water, which my PFD helps with, no water gets in. Another option here is to have a two-piece dry suit where you can have dry pants and a dry jacket. You'll be minimizing water ingress, but some water could still get in after a while, depending on the combination, meaning that this might be a mid-level safety option for when the water is warmer. In full cold winter conditions, to be clear, what I 100% recommend is a dry suit, unless you're absolutely sure about whatever other equipment you're using. You need to be safe in the water, and you need to prepare for unexpected situations where you're in the water longer than you expected to be. You might not be able to get back immediately into your kayak, or you're separated from your kayak or SUP. It's important to remember that a dry suit just provides insulation by keeping the water out and also cold air from coming in, but it doesn't provide much warmth in and of itself, so you need to dress warmly under the dry suit. I won't go into details, but I'll also mention a tulik, which is a classic Greenland paddle jacket that goes around the coaming of the kayak and is waterproof as long as the paddler is able to roll. But that's usually for advanced paddlers that are very familiar with rolling. Alright, that's the overview. So now let's take a look at the different parts of winter clothing. What follows here is what I use with the dry suit and in cold winter conditions, around or below the freezing point, up to a bit above that. So from that I can decrease or adjust the level of clothing as appropriate for the weather conditions and water temperature. Let's start from the feet and work our way up. Feet and hands tend to be the most significant problem areas for paddlers in winter. If you're in a sit-in kayak with a spray skirt on, you'll keep a lot of warmth in, but some kayaks isolate better than others, and cold feet are definitely something that paddlers experience in winter. It's also not great when you get out of the water and have to pack up your gear and are standing in snow, or if you're taking a break on an island during a paddle, it can get rather cold. Quality footwear is key. What I use, and mostly stay really warm in, is the following. For the colder part of the winter, I use long neoprene kayaking boots. These are of the Palm Nova model and can be tightened across the feet and towards the top. They are 4mm neoprene, even though I wear a dry suit so no water gets in. The advantage of waterproof neoprene boots is that as long as I don't step into the water deep enough that water gets into them, I can step into the water and have dry boots after the paddle as well. So underneath I tend to use 2 layers of socks. There are technically better solutions, but as I paddle a lot, I just tend to use a pair of regular socks that I normally use and adding a pair of thick socks made out of wool. And that's it. Together with the dry suit and boots, that keeps me nice and warm actually throughout most paddles. When temperatures drop closer to -10 degrees Celsius, I've felt the cold in the boots a few times while paddling, but it's really unusual, and it's more likely that that is because I've stepped into deep water and gotten some water into the boots. I have, however, felt the cold creep in on a number of occasions when standing in the snow for an extended period of time during takedown when I'm back on land. So for that situation, having a folding layer of foam, such as you would sit on during hiking in the woods, for example, might be practical to add some insulation. If I need more space in the kayak or otherwise want something lighter, typically when it's a bit warmer, some degrees above the freezing point, I might alternatively use my NRS paddle wet shoes, which are also neoprene, 3mm. Key here in all cases is that when you change after a paddle, it's not unlikely that your socks might accidentally get wet from ice or snow, which is probably all around you. So bringing along an extra pair or two is key, and you should have that in any case in your spare set of clothes and dry bags. What might also be easy to forget is to bring a spare pair of footwear as well. If you stepped into the water and it was deep enough that you got water in and your paddling boots are now wet, it's not great if you want to take your dry suit off after the paddle and those boots are the only thing you have for your feet. An extra luxurious solution for anyone who might want to absolutely avoid cold feet would be battery-powered heated socks, something that I know another UK-based paddler has tried with good results, but that I haven't tried myself. The way I think about clothing for the lower body is that if you were to end up in the water and are having difficulty getting up on your kayak, your lower body is what's mostly going to be in the water. So it's definitely particularly important to have a couple of layers here. I have a pair of Vycobi neoprene V-Cold flex pants, for example, but having a Drysuit offers a lot of flexibility. And after some time paddling in winter, I actually found an extra thermofiber underlayer add-on, which is specifically made for use under dry suits. So these days, what I often do is I simply use some comfortable waterproof outdoors pants, which I have. These are from Northbound, and then I use the overall layer over that. This means I have 2 layers under the dry suit, and when I've tested this in cold water, this works well. The advantage is that if I take my dry suit off after the paddle, I'll be in normal pants, so to speak, that I can walk around in and that are also waterproof in the snow or if it rains. Otherwise, you could use long johns plus whatever pants work for you, and as long as you have a multi-layer solution or something that you're confident will provide sufficient protection against the cold, that will work. And as I'll discuss later in the video, this is something that you would do well to actually test in cold water in a safe way. If you have a great solution here that works well for you, help others out by sharing your experience in the comments. For my upper body, I really adapt a lot to what the air temperature is, while always maintaining a multi-layer level of warmth that I know will be sufficient if I were to end up in the water and to remain there for some time. In one of my upcoming videos, I'll include a dry suit test with my standard clothing and leave a link here as well. Multiple layers being the principle and with appropriate materials. Cotton is something that you would typically want to avoid. If it gets wet, it quickly loses its insulating properties. If I'm fancy about it, I might add a quick drying rash guard as my first insulation layer. If I'm in a rush heading out for a paddle, I might frankly just use a t-shirt, but this is keeping in mind that I'm using the add-on overall layer, so I'll be ending up having 3 layers on my upper body. You'll want to consider that you'll be sweating if you're paddling with a lot of effort, so you'll optimally want material that breathes well. The second insulation layer for me will typically be a Vycobi V-Cold neoprene shirt with long sleeves, or alternatively a warm wool shirt with long sleeves designed for outdoors use. Then, as mentioned, my third layer effectively becomes this add-on overall. I don't always use it, but it's rather practical when I do. When it gets warmer late in the spring, while the water is still cold, I might remove the third layer, as the water at least is warming up somewhat. An alternative solution without this overall is, sometimes I might just add long johns and pants and 2 to 3 layers on the upper body, depending on how cold it is. And again, since my dry suit has a neoprene gasket around the neck, I might have some minor water ingress on the upper body in front, which I need to be aware of. So I feel that adding quick drying layers underneath that might absorb the water is helpful if I were to capsize and end up in the water, decreasing the impact somewhat, especially when I get back up on land, and that's where you tend to start getting cold. There are obviously a myriad of possible combinations here, and what works for you specifically is dependent on in which conditions you paddle and how intensely you paddle, but the multi-layer approach and being confident that your insulation as a whole under the dry suit is sufficient to keep you warm in the water in the temperatures that you're paddling in, that's the key. Feel free to share as well what your experiences are when it comes to upper body clothing in the comments below. Now to the hands. Always a particularly vulnerable spot, and together with the feet, where paddlers tend to experience the most misery while winter paddling or paddling in really cold conditions. Paddling gloves are made to withstand water, of course, but most gloves tend to get wet sooner or later, and in cold wind and air, this can get uncomfortable or even painful over time. It's no fun paddling in those conditions, and I always keep spare paddle gloves with me, readily available in case my primary gloves were to fail somehow, or that happens to the fellow paddler. For the most part, the gloves that I find work well are Camaro seamless bonding 3mm neoprene gloves, but there are a few times during extended paddles that I get cold, at least temporarily, in windy weather with those as well. Usually that gets better when you get paddling and really moving. Some paddlers choose to use pogies, which are gloves connected to your paddle, which you place your hands into, effectively protecting the paddler's hands from wind and water splash. I have a couple, but frankly I haven't really needed to use them yet. Another piece of advice is to keep your paddle gloves warm as long as you can before the paddle. I tend to put mine inside my Drysuit, since it has a convenient zipper, or inside the PFD, or otherwise protect it as best as I can while I move around setting up, if I need to use my hands without the gloves, which is sometimes needed really for dexterity. It's not great to start the paddle with ice-cold gloves that have been exposed to the cold air and moisture. A tip from another paddler here in Stockholm is open palm mitts with thin gloves made of wool inside. He tells the story of how he dropped a glove in the water during a major winter kayaking event and still didn't freeze, as the water, after being warmed up, served as extra insulation. And actually, I know that some kayakers, actually what they do is they bring boiled water almost in a thermos, and before the paddle they actually pour hot water into the gloves, meaning they're nice and warm when they start. Haven't tried that myself, but could be an option. I also know that the same UK-based paddler that I mentioned before uses waterproof battery-powered heating gloves, where the battery is fully insulated in case they were to end up in the water. I haven't tried that for paddling myself, but I do have a couple of battery-powered gloves in my reinforcement clothing for when on land, which I'll get into a little bit later in this video. The head is another part where you'll be vulnerable, certainly, to the elements, especially in heavy wind, in snow or rain. Paddling against cold wind below zero, meaning the freezing point, can be a bit taxing for your face, and you lose a lot of body heat from your head in all cases, so obviously wearing a cap or hat that protects you against the cold is important, and so having a spare handy in case it were to get wet is also important. Some dry suits come with hoods that protect you very well from the water as well, and in that case you're particularly well protected. If that's not something you have, wearing a neoprene cap or a hood might be a solution, depending on how rough the conditions are that you paddle in. But what I tend to use is simply something basic like this, and then a rain hat to add on in case it starts to rain. This usually works just fine. The only time I'd consider that I really need to use a neoprene cap or something like that is if I'm paddling in significant waves where I might really get splashed from the head down, or if I know that it's going to rain really heavily. It's also good to note that what you wear on your head adds some extra visibility if it's in bright colors, so this is recommended, and some kayakers use headwear with reflective material even on as well for extra safety. Another thing I use is a multi-purpose garment that can be used as a scarf or as a bandana. This can add some extra warmth around the neck and be pulled up to protect your face if you're paddling against cold wind. I've rarely needed to cover my face, frankly, even if I've often paddled quite a bit under the freezing point, but the few times that I've done so, it's been a welcome addition. One thing that can't be reinforced enough is that when you go out paddling in cold water or weather, you absolutely should have a full set of extra clothes with you, protected in dry bags so as to be guaranteed to stay dry in case of a capsize. If you accidentally end up in the water or otherwise get wet during your paddle, dry extra clothes can be critically important, so this is a real safety issue. During the cold season, I always bring dry bags along with extra clothes for lower and upper body, socks, extra headwear and gloves, not just paddle gloves, and also a pair of extra footwear. You'd be surprised how many paddlers I met on the water that actually forget this, or bring spare clothes but leave them in the car for after the paddle, which obviously isn't going to help you if you end up in the water, have to get up on land somewhere, which you didn't plan for, and you're far away from your vehicle. So the good news is this isn't really difficult if you make it a habit. What I do is I just keep those dry bags packed with extra clothes. So whenever I go out for a paddle, I just need to grab the dry bags and go. Everything is already packed and ready to use. Easy. One thing that I would really advise to carefully consider is to plan your time outside of the water as well. When you're no longer paddling, you'll stay warm while paddling, as the movement itself adds heat. But if you're taking a break on an island, or when you're back on land after the paddle and need to pack everything up, you're not moving around as much, and this is where it can get quite cold, especially if windy. If you have an inflatable kayak to deflate and dry, or if you have a lot of gear to pack, or you need to change clothes after the paddle, and maybe you have a distance to walk back to your car or public transport, things could really get cold after the paddle. The hands is typically where you tend to feel this first. You might need to open your paddle gloves to get a good grip on something, and then the cold can be quite brutal if temperatures are well below the freezing point. I tend to always bring normal gloves, so to speak, for after the paddle, and more than one pair, because inevitably with snow, ice or rain, sooner or later these tend to get wet, and then you just have another pair of cold and wet gloves. If I feel it's warranted, I'll have my battery-powered gloves with me for reinforcement, and then even if I have freezing hands, I can warm them up quite quickly, which is a very welcome luxury if you have freezing hands. I also often bring along a battery-powered heating vest, which also can add some extra warmth very quickly for the upper body. These are really items that I purchased for other outdoor activities, but I feel they can be a valuable resource after a paddle in cold weather. Also, adding extra safety in case I were unlucky and ended up in the water. More as a regular resource, having an extra jacket or something along to add extra heat to your upper body can be really important. Definitely in an emergency situation, but also for comfort. Again, when you're back on land in really cold weather, things can get rather cold. I have a set of waterproof pants and a jacket that are really intended as fishing clothes, but which I find excellent to put on in really cold conditions after a paddle, since they're also waterproof. They do take up a lot of extra space in dry bags, and what works for you might be different, but this is my setup, which has been tried and tested, and which I'm quite happy with. Familiarizing yourself with testing and checking your gear and clothing to make sure it's adequate for the conditions you're in is important. As noted, a dry suit provides critical insulation from the water in case you were to fall in, but it only keeps you as warm as the clothes you have underneath it, and there's always the risk that a rip or tear could create a leak, which means that you have some water ingress. Thus, you would be advised to regularly check your dry suit and also test it. You can perform a base test of it quite easily by getting in it and standing in the shower. Well, a cold shower, even better, giving you basic indications of any leaks. But to really know that your dry suit works and that the clothes you have on are sufficient for the water temperature you'll be paddling in, you would do well to actually get into the water and test it, remaining immersed in the water for a while to see what it feels like and that your dry suit doesn't leak. This is something that should be done safely, so optimally you would do so close to shore in an area which is shallow enough to reach the bottom and without any sharp objects, and with a friend in a dry suit next to you to help out if needed. I'll be uploading another video going forward of such a dry suit test, and I'll add the link here. Bringing some emergency gear along to really ensure you can help yourself or another paddler in an emergency, I would advise to bring one or more emergency heating blankets which reflect body heat. They are cheap, take up a minimal amount of space, and I always have a couple of those with me in my emergency dry bag. Remember that you might need to help other paddlers in trouble. And I also bring a small emergency shelter tent in case I had to go on shore unexpectedly and stay there in rough conditions. And more for the day-to-day convenience, I also include hand warmers and, as noted, always extra gloves and headwear. In my total setup, with dry bags with spare clothes and emergency gear, I tend to have a slight but reasonable amount of overkill, meaning just a bit more than what I would need for a full change of clothes, and then those emergency items on top of that. I've tested this and used it, and knowing that this is there is really welcome. When it's really cold and you're freezing and wet, your problem is not going to be that you have too much clothing with you. What do you say, Jon? Is it
cold?
No, it's too warm for a paddle, right? All right. All right. That concludes this overview and presentation based on what I and a few other paddlers I know use as clothing as protection during winter kayaking and during the cold season. Again, the cold season includes fall and spring, and it's important to be mindful of that in fall, depending on where you live, of course, and the temperatures. The water still tends to be rather warm from the summer while the temperatures drop in the air. While in the spring, the effect is the opposite. The air temperature gets warmer and warmer, but the water temperature can remain really cold and be lethally dangerous far into late spring. For your clothing, as noted, dress for immersion, always, meaning wear what you want to have on if you were to end up in the water, not just for the air temperature. Bring spare clothing in dry bags, and by all means, in winter, wear a dry suit. If you found this helpful, there's more information on winter kayaking safely, on kayaking safety gear and other safety issues available here on the Air on the Water channel. I'll leave some video links in the video description. You're also very welcome to join the Winter Kayaking Facebook group or the Kayaking in Spring or Kayaking in the Fall Facebook groups, where you can also ask questions or share your experience. Being well prepared means you can often avoid many potential problems or dangerous situations altogether, making for a great experience on the water while paddling responsibly and safely. After all, paddling in the cold season, as I said in the beginning, can be awesome. It can be an amazing experience. Just make sure that you stay safe out there. I wish you many great paddle trips and happy paddles. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Stay safe out there and happy paddles.